Have you ever found yourself, caught in that modern trap? You sit down, ready to relax, you open Netflix or whatever, and then you just scroll
Oh, yeah.
and keep scrolling.
Yeah.
An hour later, seriously, an hour can just vanish and you haven't actually picked a show.
Happens all the time. Or the grocery store.
Exactly.
Right.
Or you're in the grocery store, maybe trying to buy something simple like, I don't know, toothpaste. And there aren't just 5 kinds, there are 50. Or pasta sauce, 30 different brands, they all claim they're the best.
It's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. What should be easy just isn't. It feels like it should be freedom, having all that choice. But honestly, sometimes it just feels like pressure or paralysis. Okay, let's unpack this. What if I told you that even though we think we want all this freedom, all these options, having too many can actually backfire? That it can make us feel less happy with what we choose, more stressed out, even like unable to choose at all.
It sounds completely backward, doesn't it?
It really does, like some kind of weird cosmic joke. But it's a surprisingly real thing, and it shapes so much of how we live today. So today, in this deep dive, we're really going to pull back the curtain on this whole phenomenon. We've got a stack of sources here, academic papers, psychological studies, some really fascinating real-world stories, personal accounts too, and we're going to dig through them to get the key insights on what's known as the paradox of choice.
And it's important to stress this isn't just about, what brand of cereal you buy.
Not at all. It touches everything, really. Your career decisions, relationships, how you spend your time, maybe even how you figure out your purpose in life. Our mission, for you listening, is to explore why you might feel this intense pressure with decisions, big or small, and maybe, just maybe, find some practical ways to handle this world of endless options a bit better, feel a bit more satisfied. So, to really kick things off, let's circle back to that milk example. It sounds so mundane, right? Buying milk.
Right, the basic staple.
But you walk into the store, maybe you just want, say, 2% milk. But then you see it. It's not just 1% or 2%. There's whole milk, skim, sure, but then there's almond, soy, oat, coconut, rice, cashew. I think I even saw pea milk recently.
Oh, definitely. The plant-based section is huge now.
And then within each of those, you've got different brands, organic, not organic, non-GMO, lactose-free versions, added vitamins, vanilla flavor, chocolate. It's just milk, but suddenly you're standing there faced with this, complex decision tree.
And that feeling, that slight dizziness almost. That's exactly what we're talking about. That brings us right to the core idea.
Yeah, precisely. That experience you just laid out, that's the perfect illustration of what the psychologist Barry Schwartz really brought to light in his very influential 2004 book. He called it The Paradox of Choice.
Right.
And the basic idea at its heart is pretty simple. Having some choice, that's good, undeniably good. It gives us control, autonomy. But there's a tipping point. Yeah. Beyond that point, having more options doesn't actually make us freer or happier.
It does the opposite. It can, paradoxically, lead to feeling less satisfied with whatever we do choose. It can ramp up anxiety and, in some cases, lead to just freezing, not making any choice at all. And this challenge, it's only gotten more intense, in our world where everything is connected and you can buy anything anytime. Choices just keep multiplying. And the why behind it is fascinating. It's really tied to how our brains work. When you're faced with tons of options, your brain literally has to work harder.
Makes sense.
You start comparing, contrasting, weighing pros and cons for every little thing, trying to figure out which one is the absolute best, and all that mental effort. Well, it leads to something researchers call decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue. I feel like I've experienced that.
Oh, most of us have. It's like your mental energy, your willpower just gets drained.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you're more likely to make impulsive choices, maybe bad ones, or often just put the decision off entirely. Like your brain's battery is running low, and every extra option you consider just drains it a little more. And there's another layer, too. When you have so many choices, your expectations tend to go up.
Right. You expect perfection.
Exactly. If there are only, say, 3 options, you're probably okay settling for one that's good enough. But if there are 50, you start thinking, well, with all these choices, the perfect one must be here somewhere.
Which sets you up for disappointment.
Precisely. That quest for perfection makes it almost inevitable that you'll feel let down. Because even after you do make a choice, all that effort you put in, plus those super high expectations, it often leads to more regret. Buyer's remorse.
Yeah, that what-if feeling.
You keep wondering, did I miss the better one? Should I have picked the other? Replaying it in your head. So instead of feeling liberated by all the choice, you can actually feel trapped by it. stuck in this loop of indecision, comparison, feeling kind of dissatisfied. And this idea isn't totally brand new. Way back in 1970, Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock, and he talked about something called overchoice.
Overchoice.
Yeah, basically a cognitive state where the sheer amount of information and options just swamps our ability to process it all. Like trying to drink water from a fire hose, you just get overwhelmed.
Drowning in data.
Kind of. And Barry Schwartz himself summed it up so well. He said, learning to choose is hard. Learning to choose well is harder. And learning to choose well in a world of unlimited possibilities is harder still, perhaps too hard.
Wow. That really captures it, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights just how tough modern life can be on our basic ability to make decisions.
That quote definitely hits home. It really makes you think that maybe this abundance we strive for, maybe it's not always working in our favor. It's one thing to grasp this idea, intellectually. But what's really mind-blowing is that this isn't just a feeling. It's not just philosophy. There are actual, hidden things happening in our brains neurologically that explain why we feel this way.
Yes, exactly. It's not just subjective.
It's like our brains are physically reacting to having too many options.
Precisely. We're not just talking about a vague sense of being overwhelmed. We can actually see the brain reacting to choice overload. There was this really insightful study published in Frontiers in Neuroscience that used something called event-related potentials, ERPs. Yeah, it's a technique that measures brain activity. And what's great about ERPs, unlike just asking people how they feel afterwards, is that they show you the timing of brain activity. You can see what's happening millisecond by millisecond as someone is making a decision. It gives this objective peek into the cognitive struggle.
Okay, so what do they do in this study?
They had people choose fruits on a fake e-commerce website, kind of like online grocery shopping. And they set up two conditions. One was low amount of information, or LAI. Each fruit had 6 pieces of info.
6 points, okay.
The other was high amount of information, HAI, 12 pieces of info for each fruit. And these weren't random details. It was stuff like brand, price, sure, but also things relevant to fruit quality, like the climate it needs, optimal temperature, rainfall, sunshine suitability, things you'd actually consider if you were serious about picking good fruit.
Right, relevant stuff.
So first, they looked at the behavior. How long do people take to choose? And the results were pretty clear. It took significantly longer to decide in the HAI condition, the one with more information.
How much longer?
On average, it was about 1,512 milliseconds, just over 1.5 seconds in the high info group, compared to around 1,107 milliseconds, just over a second in the low info group.
Okay, so maybe half a second difference. Doesn't sound huge.
Well, percentage-wise, it's almost a 40% increase in decision time. And that extra time isn't trivial. Neurologically, it signals increased difficulty. The brain is taking longer because the cognitive load is higher. It's literally struggling more to process everything and make the call. Your mental gears are grinding a bit slower.
Okay, so it takes longer, the brain is working harder, but does it tell us anything about how good the decisions felt? Or how confident people were? Did the brain scans show that?
Absolutely. And this is where the ERP data gets really fascinating, telling us why it's harder and how it affects confidence and satisfaction.
Yeah.
Let's break down 3 key brain responses they measured. First, they looked at P2 amplitudes. You can think of P2 as reflecting your brain's attention resources, basically, how much mental energy it's dedicating to processing the info coming in. In the HAI condition, with all that extra info, the scan showed less positive P2 amplitudes. What that means is, when faced with too much information, the brain actually invests less attention.
Less. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it's like that the brain senses the flood and goes into energy conservation mode. Instead of trying harder to process everything, it kind of pulls back. It's your brain saying, whoa, too much. I can't handle all this detail, so I'm dialing back. Second, P3 amplitudes. These are really interesting because they're inversely related to how difficult you find the decision and how confident you feel. Smaller P3 means more difficulty and less confidence.
And what did they find?
In the HAI condition, significantly smaller P3 amplitudes. It's a direct neural signature of finding the decision harder and, critically, feeling less confident about the choice you eventually make. So when you're overloaded, it's not just harder to choose. Your brain is literally registering less certainty about the outcome. That internal confidence meter just drops. And third, maybe the most striking finding, was an increased late positive component, or LPC, in the HAI condition. The LPC is linked to decision process regret.
Regret during the process, not just after.
Yeah. Exactly. This suggests that when people were overloaded with info, their brains showed signs of regret while they were still trying to decide. The very act of wading through too many options was becoming, on a neural level, a regret-inducing experience. It's like your brain is already calculating potential losses or missed opportunities before you've even made the final call. And this gets even more interesting looking at brain regions. In the simpler LAI condition, different parts of the brain took charge sequentially. First, the central area for thinking and planning, then the right posterior parietal cortex for attention control. It suggests neat, distinct stages. Evaluate, then select.
A clear process.
But in the HAI condition, that central area, the thinking planning hub, stayed dominant, controlling other regions even after a choice was supposedly made.
So the brain didn't fully move on.
It seems not. It implies that with information overload, the brain keeps chewing on the other options, keeps comparing, even after you've picked one.
Yeah.
This ongoing internal debate, this what-if loop, is likely fueled by anticipating regret, leaving the brain stuck in processing mode.
Wow.
So, yeah, the science really shows how too many options literally put a strain on our brain's fatigue, less confidence, even regret kicking in early. So the question is, how does this brain stuff actually play out in our day-to-day lives?
That's incredible. It's like our brains are trying to protect us from the flood, but the defense mechanism itself causes problems, less focus, less confidence, more regret.
Yeah.
And yeah, now let's talk about where this gets really interesting, because you can see these effects everywhere, right? These aren't just lab results. They're happening when we're shopping, making life choices, often without us even connecting the dots.
Absolutely. This paradox isn't just theory. It's deeply woven into the fabric of our daily lives, from the smallest choices to the biggest ones. Let's start with A, consumerism and everyday choices. Think about the typical American supermarket. Our sources say it stocks around 30,000 different items.
30,000. That's
mind-boggling. It really is. 30,000 things competing for your attention. And while picking, say, a can of soup seems minor, all these little decisions add up. Each one chips away at your time and mental energy. Think about comparison shopping. Hunting for the best deal online, or driving to different stores. It can add hours to simple errands.
Yeah, you feel exhausted after a trip to a huge store, even if you only bought a few things.
Exactly. That's the accumulated cost of all those micro decisions. There's that classic study, maybe you've heard of it, the JAM study.
Vaguely, yeah. Tell me about it.
Researchers set up a tasting booth in a fancy grocery store. Sometimes they offered 24 different kinds of jam. Other times, just 6.
Okay.
Now, the big display with 24 jams, it attracted more people initially. About 60% of shoppers stopped to look versus 40% for the smaller display.
So more choice got more attention.
Initially, yes. But here's the twist. When it came to actually buying jam, only 3% of the people who stopped at the 24 jam table bought one. But at the 6 jam table, 30% made a purchase.
30% versus 3%. That's huge.
10 times higher. It perfectly shows how too many options can lead to paralysis. People were interested, maybe overwhelmed, and just couldn't commit to a choice. Less choice actually led to more action. It's the difference between feeling empowered and feeling burdened. And we're constantly hit with advertising, right? Making products seem essential, impossible to ignore. It fuels this need to consume, maybe driven by comparing ourselves to others, the whole keeping up with the Joneses thing.
Yeah, feeling like you need what others have.
And then there's what Fred Hirsch called the tyranny of small decisions. That little voice saying, just one more review to read, one more website to check, one more show to scroll past.
Right, the Netflix scroll again.
Exactly. These tiny choices pile up, eating away hours, causing stress, fatigue, maybe even making you dread making decisions altogether. It's like death by 1,000 tiny decisional cuts.
That really paints a picture of how it seeps into everyday life. But you mentioned it also affects high-stakes decisions. What happens when choosing the wrong thing has much bigger consequences than getting the wrong jam?
That's where the pressure really mounts and the psychological impact deepens. We see this clearly in B high-stakes decisions. Think about buying things like appliances, electronics, a car, maybe even a house.
Right, big-ticket items.
The financial hit if you make a mistake is much greater. So naturally, these decisions feel more stressful, more psychologically taxing. The fear of getting it wrong, of missing out on a better feature or deal, can be paralyzing. Trying to pick a new fridge when there are hundreds of models, it's daunting. And this is incredibly visible with huge consequences in financial planning. The sources really emphasize this. Too many investment options, too many financial products. It can lead straight to decision paralysis. People just freeze. Or worse, they make bad decisions because they're overwhelmed.
So more options in your retirement plan might actually be bad.
It can be. There was a huge study looking at almost 800,000 employees and their 401k plans. They found that for every 10 extra investment funds offered, participation in the plan actually dropped by about 2%.
Even with company matching. Free money.
Even with free money. The sheer complexity and number of choices just scared people off. Financial decisions are tough anyway. Long timelines, risk, jargon. Too many options makes it feel impossible, so people do nothing, which is often the worst thing you can do for retirement. You see this pressure cooker situation with, for example, Singapore's sandwich generation.
The people caught between kids and parents.
Exactly. They're juggling kids' education costs, maybe aging parents' health care, their own career, housing, all these urgent financial demands hitting them at once. And with all that immediate pressure, long-term planning, like figuring out the best retirement investments from dozens of options, just falls off the radar. They don't have the mental bandwidth left. There's a specific example mentioned, the Merdeka generation in Singapore. Older folks who often find themselves asset-rich, cash-poor.
Meaning they own property but have no cash.
Pretty much. Their wealth is tied up in their HDB flat, their home, but they lack liquid cash for retirement living expenses or medical bills. This forces them into really tough choices, like maybe selling part of their lease back to the government just to get cash flow. It's a choice, yes, but maybe not one they ever wanted to make, created by the structure of their assets. And think about healthcare. Especially in the US, we've gone from having maybe a few health insurance options to, well, literally endless choices. Employers offer tons of plans, HMOs, PPOs, high-deductible plans.
Yeah, the open enrollment period can be a nightmare.
Right, and often employers give you the options but don't offer much guidance. So you're left making these incredibly complex decisions about deductibles, networks, co-pays decisions you're often not equipped to make, with potentially huge consequences for your health and finances.
And doctors.
Yeah, doctors often end up being more like mediators. Patients come in armed with info from the internet, ads for drugs, alternative treatments. So doctors feel pressured to present all the options, even if one is clearly better, rather than just giving a strong recommendation. It adds another layer of complexity and choice. And finally, this paradox cuts right to the core. See life purpose and identity. It's not just about what to buy, it's about who to be. How to look, how to work, how to have a relationship, what belief system to choose, how to define our identities.
We have to construct our lives now.
We do. We're not just born into roles anymore. We have this vast menu of possibilities for how to live, and that itself can be a huge burden. We found this incredibly striking example on Reddit in a community called Rich for people who are financially independent.
Okay, what was the story?
This user, Neuraxian, shared their situation. They have about $125K a year in passive income, $500,000 net worth, basically financially free at a young age, retired, essentially.
Sounds like the dream, right?
You'd think. But they wrote about feeling extreme, overwhelming choice about what to do with my life. They had the freedom to do anything, travel, start a business, pursue any hobby, but felt this immense guilt for my luck and found themselves just puttering around.
Wow.
And they hit on something profound that resonated with others. Too much money at young age often can kill motivation and purpose. When all the external pressures are gone, the internal pressure to choose a meaningful path can become overwhelming.
That's incredibly powerful. It completely flips that idea that unlimited freedom is the ultimate goal. So for this person, Neuraxian, or really for anyone feeling lost even with options, what kind of advice came up? How do you choose a purpose when purpose itself is a choice?
Well, the advice in that thread was fascinating because it was so varied, which kind of reflects the problem itself, right? Lots of choices on how to solve the choice problem.
Yeah.
Some suggested getting professional help, like finding a lifelong therapist to work through those big existential questions. Others really pushed the idea of giving back, volunteering, getting involved in the community, maybe starting a nonprofit. The idea being that contribution often creates meaning.
Makes sense. Purpose through service.
Then there were more concrete suggestions. Travel extensively, take up a serious physical challenge like bodybuilding, start a creative project like an animation studio, even something quirky like opening a cat cafe.
So try things, basically.
Yeah, try things, find structure, find connection. Executive coaching came up too, hiring someone to help impose structure on all that freedom. But the common denominator in all the advice was this search for meaning when the usual constraints, especially financial ones, were gone. And while this might seem like a rich person problem, it actually connects to anyone feeling adrift despite having choices.
Yeah, you don't need to be wealthy to feel paralyzed by career options or life paths.
Exactly. It shows that freedom from constraints doesn't automatically equal freedom to live meaningfully. Sometimes it just highlights the burden of having to choose that meaning yourself. So, okay, if more choice causes all these problems, does that mean less is always the answer? Should we all become minimalists? That really is the core question, isn't it? And like most things with human psychology, the answer isn't a simple yes or no, it's more nuanced. The less is more idea definitely has merit, but it's not the whole story. Research actually points towards something like a U-shaped curve for satisfaction versus choice.
A U-shaped curve. How does that work?
Well, imagine a graph. As you go from having very few choices to having a moderate number, your satisfaction generally goes up. That's the good part. Freedom, control, finding what you want. That's the downward slope of the U.
Yeah, more choice is better initially.
Initially. But then you hit a peak, the bottom of the U. After that point, as the number of choices keeps increasing, satisfaction starts to decline. That's the paradox kicking in: overload, confusion, pressure, dissatisfaction. That's the upward slope of the U.
So there's a sweet spot, but too much sends satisfaction down again.
Exactly. Too little feels restrictive, but too much becomes counterproductive. Like balancing on a beam, easy in the middle, tricky at the extremes. So let's dig into A, the case for less. Minimalism and choice reduction. This is definitely a powerful strategy for many. But interestingly, there's research that pushes back against the idea that overload is always the biggest villain. A study in the Journal of Consumer Psychology looked at over 7,000 people across 6 countries.
Okay, a big study.
Yeah, and they found that choice deprivation, that feeling of not having enough options, feeling limited, was actually reported more often and felt more harmful by consumers than choice overload in many situations.
Wait, really? So lacking choice is often worse than having too much. That kind of goes against the usual narrative, doesn't it? It's a huge shift. So it's not always about too much choice being the problem. That really changes how we should think about this. Maybe just slashing options isn't always the right move.
Precisely.
Right.
While the popular discussion, heavily influenced by Schwartz, has focused on overload and many businesses have simplified things, this study reminds us that people are different. What feels like overload to me might feel like necessary variety to you. And for some people, feeling restricted is genuinely frustrating. You see this play out in discussions on places like the or minimalism subreddit. People share experiences, often comparing, say, European grocery stores to American ones.
Right, I've heard this. Less variety in Europe.
Often, yeah. They'll talk about finding maybe one brand flour, one type of canned tomato, less out-of-season stuff, and then they come back to the U.S. and find shopping completely overwhelming. 5 kinds of everything, giant stores. They mention Aldi or Trader Joe's being maybe 900 square meters versus a Kroger or Wegmans that could be 11,000.
Whoa, that's a massive difference.
It is. And they describe feeling decision fatigue by the time you're checking out in the bigger stores. The smaller selection feels easier, less draining. You just grab what you need. So minimalism directly tackles this option paradox. It's about reducing not just physical stuff, but mental clutter, mental options. People report feeling happier, less anxious, even more creative, like a painter who finds freedom within a limited palette.
Interesting analogy. Constraints breeding creativity?
Exactly. And there's this common feeling people describe after decluttering, feeling rich, not with money, but rich in time, mental space, focus. One person put it beautifully, feeling like they finally have everything they need, even in a tiny apartment, because their mental bandwidth is freed up for things that truly matter. It's a real sense of liberation for many. But, and this is a crucial but, we also have to look at B. When more choice can still be good, simplifying isn't always the answer. Sometimes having more options is better, provided it's managed well. It's not just about the number of choices, but about clarity, relevance, and intent, how those choices are presented.
Choice architecture, right, how it's designed.
Exactly. Think about online shopping. For people who are maximizers, those folks who really need to find the absolute best. Having lots of options is great. If you give them powerful tools like in-depth filters and comparison charts, they can happily dive deep and analyze.
Okay, cater to the maximizer.
But for satisficers, people who are happy with good enough and just want an easy decision, you overwhelm them with that. For them, things like preset bundles, most popular tags, or best value badges are way more helpful. They can choose quickly and confidently.
So tailoring the presentation to the person.
Right. It's about smart curation, not just arbitrary reduction. And consider financial services again. The fact that today, regular retail investors who used to be underserved and overcharged now have access to simple, low-cost investment options. That's a good thing.
Yeah, more access is definitely positive there.
Before, many people had essentially no decent choices. So in that context, having more good, accessible options is a huge step forward. It's about ensuring desirable choices are available, especially to those who lacked them previously. So it's complicated. More isn't always better, less isn't always the cure-all. The real question is, how do we find that balance? How do we navigate this without letting choice become a tyrant?
That really is the core challenge, isn't it? If we know this paradox can cause so much stress, paralysis, regret, what can we actually do about it? What are the practical steps listeners can take starting today to feel less overwhelmed and more in control in this world of endless options?
That's the crucial part, moving from understanding to action. And thankfully, there are several concrete strategies we can use to sort of tame the choice beast and find more satisfaction. First, and maybe most fundamentally, is A, embracing good enough. This is what Barry Schwartz calls satisficing.
Satisficing, not optimizing.
Exactly. Instead of that exhausting, endless hunt for the absolute best, which, as we've seen, is often impossible and anxiety-provoking, Schwartz urges us to aim for, that'll do, just good enough.
Letting go of perfection.
Yes. Chasing perfection is a massive time waster, he argues, and it really harms our well-being. It keeps us anxious, always second-guessing. The research shows that people who consciously choose to be satisficers, who accept a good enough option and just move on, they consistently report being happier and less anxious.
That sounds liberating.
It really is. It means lowering those sky-high expectations, accepting that most decisions don't need to be perfect, and realizing that good enough often leads to perfectly fine, even great outcomes. It frees up so much mental energy.
Okay, aiming for good enough instead of perfect. That makes a lot of sense for reclaiming mental energy. What about just making fewer decisions in the first place?
You anticipated the next point perfectly. That's B, automating decisions. The idea here is simple. Make a decision once, create a rule or a routine, and then stick to it. Don't relitigate it every single time.
Reducing the need to choose constantly.
Precisely. That Reddit example about the gas station was brilliant. The person made a rule. If I'm near the cheap station and under half a tank, I fill up. End of story. No daily calculation, no debating.
Takes the thinking out of it.
Completely. And you can apply this everywhere. Meals, Taco Tuesday, Stir Fry Friday, whatever. Or just have 5, 7 default meals you rotate through. Cuts down that daily what's for dinner, panic. Clothes, a capsule wardrobe, or even just laying out clothes the night before. Steve Jobs' turtleneck wasn't just style, it was decision reduction. Mornings. A set routine for getting ready streamlines things. Bill subscriptions. Automate payments for essentials. Set a yearly calendar reminder to review the rest.
Create systems.
Create systems to reduce that extemporaneous decision-making. It dramatically cuts down on mental fatigue. Then there's C, intentionality and education. This is especially key for the bigger, more complex stuff. The Endowist source really stressed being intentional about the choices we make.
Meaning consciously engaging.
Yes. Actively understanding the factors involved, taking ownership. This includes things like financial literacy, educating yourself, especially with longer lifespans, making retirement planning crucial even for older generations. Thankfully, online tools now make investing more accessible with lower amounts, personalized advice, automated options.
So using tools to be more intentional.
Exactly. But intentionality also means knowing when to seek help for really complex things. Major investments, healthcare choices, career shifts, getting professional advice and guidance is often the most intentional move. Don't feel you have to navigate the overwhelming array alone. Being educated helps you ask better questions and know when you need that expert input. And finally, a really important one. D, managing regret. We saw the brain's tendency towards regret, that LPC signal. It's normal to feel buyer's remorse or FOMO, especially if a choice doesn't pan out perfectly.
Yeah, beating yourself up over it.
Right. But while we need to take responsibility for our choices and learn from them, we also need to cut ourselves some slack. We need to realize that we're adaptable and can cope with poor decisions. Humans are incredibly resilient. Most choices aren't make or break.
So how do we manage that regret?
The advice is basically make the decision and then consciously choose to stick to it. Avoid the overthinking and spiraling. Once it's done, especially if it's reversible or not life-altering, try to accept it and move forward. Don't endlessly replay the what-ifs. Trust that you can handle the outcome.
Focus on adapting, not ruminating.
Exactly. The goal isn't perfect choices, it's good enough choices, followed by acceptance and moving on. That acceptance is a powerful antidote to the regret that endless options can fuel.
Wow. That is such practical, really usable advice for navigating modern life. So we've gone from seeing this surprising problem too much choice being bad, to understanding the brain science behind it, seeing how it plays out everywhere, from the grocery store to our deepest life questions, and realizing that the answer isn't just less, but maybe smarter and more intentional choice.
Right. It's about finding that balance.
And understanding this paradox isn't just interesting, it feels like a genuine tool you can use to make your daily life better, feel less anxious, and maybe find more real satisfaction in the choices you do make. So, wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you listening right now?
Well, if we go back to that idea from the Reddit discussion that a key purpose in life is to give it meaning, and if we accept that having too many choices can actually get in the way of finding or creating that meaning by overwhelming us or paralyzing us, then maybe true freedom isn't really about having limitless options after all.
What is it then?
Perhaps true freedom lies less in the ability to choose anything and more in the wisdom to choose our constraints, to consciously decide what not to choose, what to let go of in order to cultivate what truly matters to us. So maybe the provocative thought to leave you with is this. How might you intentionally, voluntarily opt out of some decisions in your life, big or small, not as a sacrifice, but as a way to free up your precious mental space and energy for the choices that genuinely define your purpose and bring you fulfillment?
That's a powerful question to reflect on. Choose your constraints to find your freedom. Embrace good enough. Automate where you can. Be intentional and manage that regret. Thanks for diving deep with us today.